Really? Great!
Well, good afternoon to everyone. I am Dennis Wint, a member of the Board of Trustees of the library. It's a great pleasure to have you here for this lecture. Downeast, Maine is known for its rugged coast, its expansive blueberry barrens left by the retreating glaciers and the vast endless forest and rivers and lakes. It is not as prosperous as southern Maine, but it had viable communities and opportunities through fishing, through sardines and lobster, through lumbering, through small business and manufacturing. But while Downeast is only an hour from Bar Harbor, it is a world away. Some consider it the Valley of the Overlooked. While lobstering continues today to provide good jobs, many of the other jobs and opportunities have disappeared. Downeast is unfortunately known for the epidemic, economic loss, generational poverty, and despair. Washington County is the oldest county in the state in terms of the age of its population, and Maine is the oldest state in the nation. But there is also hope. There are the 5 girls and their coming of age that Gigi Georges told in her book, Downeast. Gigi was interested in learning about the young people of Downeast, Maine, about the girls that were caught between transformation and tradition and the need to escape for success, their joys and their pains of life in a region with significant challenges, and their journey of heartbreak and hope in uncertain times. Downeast is a nuanced and a unique portrait of rural America with women at its center that has transformed our understanding of small towns and hope for the future of rural America. There are timeless values and ideals: strength of family and community, reverence for nature's role, dignity of cracked hands, and the raw, enduring power of home. Gigi received her education from Wellesley, a bachelor's degree, MS from Princeton, and a PhD from NYU in public policy. In terms of her career, she was the White House Special Assistant to President Bill Clinton, Chief of Staff for Hillary Clinton's in her New York's office, Director of Program of the Harvard Kennedy School of Innovation and Strategic Initiative, Managing Director of the Glover Park Group, a leading firm dealing with communication. She was raised in a large, boisterous immigrant family in Brooklyn, not Brooklyn, Maine, but Brooklyn, New York. 15 years ago, she decided with her family to leave the urban area of the city and move to rural Maine and also New Hampshire, where she has a home. So please join me in welcoming Gigi Georges.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for that generous introduction and for reflecting on the themes of the book in a way that I couldn't do so eloquently. So thank you for that. Thank you for all being here on this beautiful night after the rains blew through. It's fortuitous, and it's great to have a little bit of a breeze despite the heat. I'm going to try to... Yeah, it's not quite, yeah, it's not quite steady. Perfect. Great. And thank you to the library, to the Southwest Harbor Library, to Eric, to the trustees who are here, to Kate and other staff members who made this possible. Southwest Harbor is our home. I have my husband Jeff here. You'll hear a little bit more about him soon. And it is very much a part of our hearts. The library, our daughter Margot, who is wandering around town right now, is almost 11, and ever since she was born, we have brought her to the Southwest Harbor Library, programming throughout the year, and it is the library she holds closest to her heart as well. And I hope we have that for many, many more years to come. I thought I would start simply by doing a quick reading with the setup, and then from there talk a little bit about some of the larger themes of Downeast. Some of you may have read it and others have not, and talk a little bit about the process that I went through in reporting on this book and getting to know the 5 remarkable young women of Downeast, Maine, and by extension, their families, their friends, their community, and everything that it stands for. So let me do a little setup on the reading. It's 2016. The scene is Downeast, Washington County. It's an hour north of here, but as Dennis said, a world away. A caravan of 4,000 local fans has made its way to the Augusta Civic Center to watch their hometown girls, the Narraguagus High Lady Knights, play in the state's high school basketball championship. They're a Class C team, not a Class A team, but they could be the Boston Celtics as far as the fans feel. And they come from towns, these fans and these girls, that are just a few hundred people in population. The towns are isolated and economically struggling and challenged. And the girls are serious underdogs in this championship game. But they pull out an improbable win. And they're led and inspired to victory by their coach and trailblazing lobster boat fisherman and lobster boat racer, Olivia Marshall. And so, with 7 seconds left in the game, the Lady Knights still led by 2 possessions. The gold ball was in their grasp, and the girls were dancing a bit as Olivia called their last time out. "No fouls," she exhorted, fighting to check her own exhilaration. "Just let them shoot." But the girls were smiling, and Olivia was smiling, and she said, "Man, I'm proud of you," and sent them on their way. When the game ended, the roars were deafening, and the night-long celebration began. Every one of Harrington's 950 residents felt as if they had carried home the coveted gold ball. Along with neighbors from the adjoining towns of Addison, Cherryfield, Columbia, and Millbridge, they had made the 5-hour round-trip drive to Augusta Civic Center. They had followed their hometown girls since the season's late November start from the gym at Narraguagus, where most of them had gone to school years earlier, to Searsport, Baileyville, Jonesport, and other hamlets along the Downeast corridor. As the season chugged along, and the girls ground their way toward an 18-2 record, the people here found themselves forgetting, for a couple of hours each week, about where they'd find the money for the unpaid heating bill, or how many times they'd fix that leaking roof on their aging double-wide, about the way the money wasn't coming in so fast once blueberry raking season had come and gone, or why this year's lobster yield wasn't even close to what they needed, ever since Donnie had succumbed to the lure of fentanyl, about where they'd go without their neighbors knowing to stock up on food for the long winter that lay ahead. They found themselves forgetting, and they cheered for the squad with an average height of 5'5". They cheered for their multi-talented coach, Olivia Marshall, who gave the girls something to strive for on and off the court. And they cheered for the possibility that this once robust set of communities could beat the odds in other ways. Because if a group of underdog girls could lift themselves up from the valley of the overlooked, then surely they could too. So that is essentially the opening of the book. And the book goes on to follow the lives, as I said, of these 5 young women who I met when they were in their late teens and who now are in their early to mid-20s really. I thought that I would start this discussion. Sometimes I start these talks by just recording how I went about this and what brought a Brooklyn kid to a place like Downeast, Washington County, and I will get into that, but I've been thinking a lot about something that I know a lot of us have been thinking and talking about these past years, and that is this seemingly vast urban-rural divide that we live in this country. And the way in which we seem to be moving further and further apart in understanding each other and in reconciling our differences. And while it is not all about urban-rural, many of the characteristics and the tenets that we think of when we think of urban versus rural are seen underneath that set of umbrellas. And when I began this journey, which I began in early 2016, I was, as I said, this very urban-centric person in many ways, someone who had grown up in the boisterous immigrant family in Brooklyn, New York, who had spent her life working on urban issues, thinking about urban issues, particularly urban schools. I spent a lot of time in my career working with kids and teachers and policymakers in urban school settings from New York to New Jersey, from my perch in Washington that I was so fortunate to have the opportunity to spend that time at the White House, and really not thinking so much about what was going on with kids in rural places. That was something else. And then I met my husband, Jeff, and though he too was a New Yorker, grew up in Long Island, not quite Brooklyn, he persuaded me to come to northern New England. It didn't take much persuading the first time I came and set foot in Southwest Harbor when we were dating, but he had already found this amazing place, this amazing state, and he had found it quite some years before. And he said to me, let's raise our family and live our lives in a more rural place. It was something he had dreamed about, and increasingly, as I came to know Maine, it's something that I dreamed about as well. And so we made our way north and began to spend our time both in New Hampshire and Maine, and have spent the last 15 years in those two places in relatively rural settings. And we began to raise our daughter, now turning 11, Margot, in relatively rural places. And yet I still remained connected to my urban background. And I began to think, what is it we're not seeing and understanding, particularly about young people in rural places? Why is it that almost all of the narratives that we read about rural America are downbeat? Why do we have such a bleak sense when we look from other places back to rural places by and large? There must be something more to the story. And as we were raising Margot, I saw with my own eyes that there was something more to the story. Yes, there were challenges. There were tremendous challenges. There are challenges everywhere. There are challenges in rural America. We know the economic struggles. We know about the factories closing. We know about the opioid epidemic. We know about the really hard work and resilience that folks in rural places have to have and endure in order to make it. But I wanted to widen that lens, and I wanted to see if there was something more to the story. And so, one day in early 2016, I turned to Jeff and I said, I need to dig deeper, and I know the first person I need to go see, and that is the Reverend Scott Planting, who I think many of you, or some of you may know. And for those of you who don't know, Scott Planting is someone who had led a ministry in Farmington, Maine for many, many years in that area, came to the Bar Harbor area and ended up running the Maine Seacoast Mission, which I talk about and write about in the book, which plays a significant influence in the lives of these girls and of their communities. And the Maine Seacoast Mission, for those of you who don't know, has a very storied history. It is a tremendous institution that has played a significant and meaningful role not only in the lives of folks in Western Washington County, where I write and where I reported, but also on the Maine Islands and in other parts of rural Maine. And so I knew that Scott would have a window into many of the questions that were burning in my mind. And I sat down with him, Jeff and I sat down with him for a number of hours. And our daughter Margaret ran around, she was quite young at the time. I asked him all these questions that were burning through my mind about, isn't there more, and how can I learn more, and isn't there a more optimistic side, and there must be more to the story. And I was persistent, and he stopped me and he said, and I said, where do I have to go? And he said, you don't need to go far. Get in your car, drive an hour up the coast, get out in the towns of Downeast, Washington County, and I think you'll be surprised by what you see. And so I did. Whatever Scott tells me to do, I do. So I did, and he was right. And what he did for me, because I know I'm always asked, well, how did you, this woman from Brooklyn, New York, this person from away, how did you get there and get to talk to folks, and how did you get them to open not just their doors but their hearts and minds to you? And I want to talk a little bit more about that with the process, but I would say number one, having someone like Reverend Scott Planting say to a number of the key stakeholders there, the superintendent of the schools there, the high school principal of Narraguagus High, and a few others who have meaningful roles in the community, saying to them, give her a chance. That was all it took. And that was everything to get me started. And so I did that, and I found my way to Narraguagus High. The principal of the high school, who I talk about at some length in the book, and whose story is somewhat recounted in the book as well, she opened the doors to my sitting down with a bunch of the young people in the high school, particularly the upperclassmen. I was mindful that I wanted to talk to kids who were sort of older and had a sort of a sense of perspective around both what it was like growing up in Downeast, Washington County, but also a sense of where they might be going, both physically and in other respects with their lives. And so the high school set up these focus groups, informal focus groups, and I sat around a table with a bunch of students in small groups, and all off the record, I just said to them, look, let's just talk about your lives and your dreams and your hopes and your challenges. And these kids were amazing. They were so open and so thoughtful and so self-possessed, 17 and 18-year-olds, and many of them had been through a great deal. And they were willing to talk about it, but they were also, to a student, hopeful. And that was one of the aha moments that I had that set me on the course to write a more optimistic book about young people in rural Maine and, by proxy, in rural America. The other aha moment I had at the end of that time of doing these informal focus groups was that while the boys were terrific and willing to talk and open, there was something going on with the girls. The girls were excelling in almost every respect: academics, athletics, extracurriculars, sports, leadership inside the high school and outside more broadly in the community and in their churches. There was something going on, I believe, just from having those conversations with those kids, that the girls were showing something extra. And so I went back to check my hypothesis, and I spoke with the high school principal, I spoke with the school superintendent, I spoke with some others in the community, and all of them said, yeah, you got it. There's something going on with the girls. It's been going on for a while. And it's not to say that we're not proud of our boys. We're very proud of our boys. But we see in our girls a little bit more of our hope for the future. And we see in our girls a fierceness in the best sense of the word, and a maturity and a resilience that has made them leaders in our community. And we know we've got tough times, but when we think about the future, we think about these girls, or boys, both girls, and the way in which they're going to help lead us through these tough times. And I'm going to interject for a second, because tough times, everyone I talk to in Downeast, Washington County, some I would ask, well, do you think your community is poor? Do you think there's poverty? Do you think, what do you think about that word? Everyone said to me, it's tough times. It's tough times, and not poverty. And that to me was really fascinating, because that reflected a state of mind and a sense of pride that I believe is at the crux of one of my other the third moments and sort of findings that I delve into in the narrative of the book, and that is that the sense of community, the strength of social capital in these communities runs so deep and so wide that in spite of all of the difficulties, and perhaps in part because of them, these communities rally and support each other in ways that I think we don't often see in other settings. And that is one of, I think, the most overlooked aspects of the rural story. That when we talk about rural places, and when we look at the most widely discussed books, accounts, media reports about rural America, one of the things that almost always runs through as a significant strand is a celebration of those who escape, of the ones who make it, who get out, and often don't look back. Some do look back, and some do come back, and some do help. But what we miss in those stories, and those are important stories, by the way. They're important stories. They're valuable. And the folks who we talk about in that respect are also critical to the discussion that we have. But by widening the lens, we get to see that there are a whole bunch of other young people who make a decision to stay, who may have a choice and decide to stay, or who may not have a choice and still want to stay. They want to stay and build because they're bonded to the natural surroundings that they've grown up in. Their work is tied to place. Their life is tied to place. They believe in the place they come from. They see the warts, and yet they wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And in that is a connection to the folks who have helped sustain them, the mentors, the teachers, the church leaders, the family members, the broader community leaders. And yes, they will complain about them. And yes, they will complain about the fact, as is true in Downeast, Washington County, that you got to go an hour to go bowling, or, let alone a movie theater. And they'll complain about the fact that there's not a lot to do, and there's not a lot of variety, and that basketball kind of is it for the winter, and that, it gets quiet and isolated. But they feel in their hearts, many of these young people, that there is something good and true and valuable in that place that they call home, and they feel rooted. And so they may want to go off and see things, and they are encouraged to do so. And they may want to go off and have experiences, and they are encouraged to do so oftentimes. But many of them do want to come back, and many of them do want to stay and build. And that part of the story, I think, is something that we ought to celebrate more. Because when we reflect back to these kids that the only way to succeed is to escape, then they, in turn, feel defeated. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, I don't want to talk too long. I do want to talk a little bit about each of the girls, and then I thought we could open it up to questions if that works for everybody. Because I'd love to get into more of a discussion. I always enjoy that part of my talks much more than I do standing up here and talking at you. But I do want to pay homage to these 5 girls by telling you just a little bit about each of them and giving you a quick update on where each of them is, because as you know, I met them quite a few years ago at this point, and they tolerated me following them everywhere and being in their lives in ways that I think they never expected. And I'm also happy to talk about the process, and very, very pleased to tell you that these girls were very, very much a part of this process from start to finish. And that they continue to be in my life and I in theirs, and that although we used pseudonyms for the 5 girls, we knew that everyone in the community would know who they were. They were more than fine with that. We just wanted to sort of guard off a little bit of the Googling from curious strangers, a little bit, and then as it turned out, 3 of the 5 almost immediately shared their names, did media with me, did talks with me. Two of them have chosen not to, but one of them has actually chosen to share her beautiful photography, which is on my website, and I encourage you, GigiGeorges.com. I encourage you to go there just to see her beautiful work, never mind anything else. So the 5 girls. Audrey Barton, she was the star of the Narraguagus High School basketball team, the Lady Knights, who went to victory improbably, as I recounted at the beginning of this talk. Audrey, an amazing girl. They're all amazing girls, but she came from a multi-generational family on the Back Bay Road in Millbridge, and there her whole family, grandma, the aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone still to this day lives on the Back Bay Road. It is an amazing family. They're a fishing family. Audrey herself, though, while she fished through her childhood and fishes to this day, summers, didn't like fishing. She wanted to do something else. She named her boat the No Interest because she had no interest in fishing. And so she gets this coveted scholarship. She's a bright girl, great athlete, gets a coveted scholarship to Bates College, and is the pride of her town in so many ways. People still talk about Audrey Barton and that winning team that she led. And she goes to Bates, spends a year there, wants to study speech pathology, wants to come back to her community and be a speech pathologist, which is a much needed service in the community. And she, after only a few months at Bates, playing basketball and doing quite well academically, says, I want to go to UMaine because I want to be closer to home. I know where I want to be. I know that I want to help be a leader in this community, and I feel tied to this community, and I can't pursue a speech pathology degree at UMaine or at Bates without going through contortions and twists and turns, and she does it. And I am proud to report, in fact, Jeff and I were just up in UMaine a few days ago, and Audrey was there. We got to visit with her. I'm proud to report that she not only finished her degree with honors at UMaine undergrad in studying communication sciences, which is essentially speech pathology, but she finished her master's as well, and she's about to start a wonderful job in a district very nearby to here, and she's so excited. So that's Audrey. Josie is what we think of as the sort of stereotypical rural story. Josie is valedictorian of her class and ends up being the second from the community, from Downeast, Washington County, from the high school, ever to go to Yale. The first was her older sister. So it's an extraordinary family. They're a family whose roots are from away. Her grandparents came from Pennsylvania, but they found themselves very, very integrated into the community from a very early time. They own a dairy farm and very well respected in the community. A strict Baptist faith family. Very religious, very strong faith, as Josie herself continues to have very strong faith. She finds herself with one foot in Downeast, Washington County, and one foot in New Haven, and one can imagine all of the tensions that come into play when having that. And she thinks that she will never look back, and yet she finds, as we go through this process, and I spent those 4 years reporting, she finds that her pulls and tugs back to her home community are a lot stronger than she would have imagined. And while she is going off to study in London in the fall after graduating in art and archaeology from Yale, she herself has said to me on numerous occasions, and as recently as a month ago, I may not come back to live, but I sure will be back to do something more with this community, and I will never let it go. Willow, the third. Willow comes from a very troubled family. Her father, a substance abuser, physically abuses his wife, Willow's mom, and her brothers emotionally abuses Willow. Very tough circumstances. Willow moves 7 times before she's 8 years old. She's shuttled between grandparents' houses. One of her grandmothers is shipped off while she's living there on a felony count to prison. Her grandfather is controlling. It is a difficult situation, and yet Willow is not a victim. Willow loves Downeast name, and she has an opportunity to leave it at one point in the book. And she reflects and she thinks and she ponders. And I remember sitting across from her at the school cafeteria where we often sat to talk about her life and thinking, I want to tell her not to go because she has so much here. And the choice she might have made was not a good choice. But I held my tongue and was happy to see that she didn't make that choice to leave. But she chose to stay and to build something really, really special. And she is a beautiful photographer. She's the one whose photographs are on the website. And it was very much for Willow, in fact, that all 4 of the other girls chose to stick with pseudonyms because they wanted to help protect Willow. And they were all very protective of her. All these girls know each other very, very well. So Willow pursues her photography, loves the wharf, loves being around the fishermen, ends up being a bookkeeper, just got married and is having a child. And Jeff and I visited with them just a number of months ago, and she's doing really, really great. But she went through quite a bit. And fourth, her best friend Vivian, who comes from an established Downeast family. This family, they are very well known in the community, but she struggles emotionally. Her parents get divorced, and she has a lot of emotional difficulties. And she is a superb writer and an extraordinarily bright young woman. And she struggles over the strict religious upbringing that she is raised in, and the town that she doesn't feel like she quite fits into, although she wants a rural life. But she doesn't feel like she can make it in this town with all of the expectations that come with her name. And anyone who knows rural life knows that one's name is in many respects everything, whether it is a good name, quote, or a not-so-good name. So Willow suffered from the not-so-good name and what came along with that, and Vivian, her best friend, suffered from just the opposite, but both felt pressures. And so Vivian ends up finding a life and a home up in Halton, Maine, in a remarkably similar community in many respects, but not similar in others. And she has just finished her nursing degree and is happily engaged and is doing really, really well, despite having gone through some real difficulties in her life as well. And then finally, McKenna. And I'll close with McKenna and then move to questions and discussion. McKenna is a spitfire. McKenna is a tremendous athlete, softball player, basketball player, even though she's not very tall. And she has wanted to be a lobster boat fishing captain since she could walk, since she could talk. She's got the dad and the brothers and a very strong-willed and, again, fierce mother. And they look at her when she's very young, and she's looking at them, and she says, I want to fish as soon as I can. And finally she convinces her dad that she can go out there, and she is fishing from the time she is 8 years old regularly. She's a lobster boat fishing captain by the time she is 17, running her own boat with a dear friend of hers at her side as her sternman, and another young woman. And she goes through one of the most familiar struggles that folks who fish go through, right, in this region, and that is, do you go to college or do you just start fishing? Because you love to fish, it's good money, it's hard work, but you know it's going to be your future, and you're one of the ones who has that opportunity to do it and to do well by it, despite the many costs that are associated with running it. And so she goes back and forth, and her parents, who come from very little, but build up this incredible wharf through sheer grit and work and determination, and that resilience that runs through each of the young women in this book, they convince her to go ahead and get her business degree while fishing, and she does it, and she is to this day fishing full-time and doing quite well with it, despite having been through a real scare, as a lot of the lobster fishermen in the region did in the height of the COVID period, about whether or not there would be an industry to continue on. And so I actually recount some of that in the end of the book, because the book goes into those earliest months of the sort of peak of the difficulties and the lockdowns with COVID. So those are the 5 young women. This is the community they grew up in, and I am very, very proud, above all, to be able to tell their stories and to be their voice. And that has been the most meaningful part of this journey, to be able to give them the megaphone and to serve as a vessel for that. I'll close with that and welcome any questions. Thank you.
So I'm sure there are many, many questions, but I have a few that Gigi and I talked a little bit about before. So she grew up in this large immigrant community in Brooklyn and ends up in studying rural counties in Downeast, Maine. Are there any compare and contrast, similarities, learnings?
So, great question. I wouldn't have thought there would be any similarities or overlap, but I came to, as I was writing and reflecting, and I had an editor at HarperCollins who is very seasoned, and guided me beautifully. And she said to me, you need to write a prologue or a preface that puts a little bit of your story into this. And I said, I don't want to do that. I just want to report, and I just want to write about these girls in this community. And she insisted. And so I began to, in order to do that, to think about my background and any ways that I could find some overlap. And lo and behold, it was a lot easier than I thought it would be, because I grew up in a very tight-knit community in a very urban place. But it was in many ways similar to the community life of Downeast, Washington County. I grew up in a family that really believed, as an immigrant family, I believed in the power of faith and the community, the Greek church and the Greek community, and the bonds that come with being a part of that, in the power and necessity of doing your very best in school and getting as strong an education as you possibly could, that traditional classic immigrant story, and in belief in the bonds of family and the bonds to place, whether that place was our little spot, our little checkerboard spot in Brooklyn, or whether that place was my mother's village back in this very remote part of Sparta, of the Peloponnese in Greece. And so what I came to understand was that it's not so much about urban versus rural, but it is about the pieces of relationships that come together in the places that we live in, and whether we can find that sense of community and build that social capital in Brooklyn, New York, where you're surrounded by concrete, or in Downeast, Maine, where you're surrounded by the beauty of the ocean and the natural wonders that we are so fortunate to have by being in this state. And so I found there were a lot more similarities than I would have ever imagined.
As someone from away, how did you embed yourself in the community and gain the trust of the girls, the family, teachers, the mentors, and the community itself?
Well, more than anything, of course, I had, as I mentioned, the help of Scott Planting to just open that door just a little bit, and that meant a great deal. But once having had that opportunity to walk through those doors of the high school and to spend a little bit of time with the students, and as I began to grow those circles, so that I ended up speaking with literally hundreds of folks, both in and connected to the community over the time that I did my reporting. Number one, number two, number three, listen. I just listened. It was a lot simpler than you might imagine. And I found that when you listen with an open heart and an open mind, when you really listen and ask questions with respect, whatever your belief systems, whether you agree or disagree, that by and large, people are really good deep down, and they want to tell their stories, and they want to share their perspectives in a way that is thoughtful and meaningful. And so that's what I did. I just listened. And I came back over and over and over and over again. So they knew that I wasn't just passing through. I did. I actually recorded every interview that I did. And so I have a set of transcriptions that is quite long. And I backed them up with Reporter's Notebook. My brother is actually a very, very dear friend of my brother's in the audience, who I haven't seen very much in the past years, and I'm so pleased he's here today with his wife. But I was thinking about that. My brother was actually a shoe leather reporter, and he taught me. He was a reporter's reporter, and everywhere he went, he had his little Reporter's Notebook. I don't know if folks remember these little, or have ever seen them. They're these little Stano notebooks in his pocket. And so I went and I recorded, but every interview I did, I had a reporter's notebook and I took up backup notes. And so I still have a huge set of boxes of reporter's notebooks in our home, and they're taking up space, but I just feel very close to them. And so I have both, and that was important. It was important to me for obviously continuity, and I would take notes after the interviews of things that stayed with me so that I wouldn't have to wade through absolutely everything, but it was also obviously important for legal reasons, because writing a narrative nonfiction book in a place that you're not from, or in any place, frankly, really, I think, requires being as meticulous as possible with those records, so that if you are ever challenged, unfortunately, I have not been. I've had a really, really nice embrace from many, many members of the community, which I'm grateful for, but at least I would have that.
Thank you for your presentation. Really emotional experience of reading the book. But your presentation was emotional as the experience of reading the book. So well done. Thank you. But I'm just curious. You said that the girls who were close to or at majority age consented to publication of the information. What about all their families and the ongoing? I'm sure anybody who knows the community, as you said, easily too. So what kind of consent and where does that stand? Thank you.
Yes, that's another great question. So all of the, just to sort of back up for a moment on the girls, all of the girls but one were 18 or older at the time that I started reporting in earnest. And so they all were of consent age with the exception of McKenna, and her mother was present at all of the sessions that we did until McKenna was 18. And then she just continued on because by that point we had become good friends, and she wanted to be a part of it and I wanted her to be a part of it. So that was really a nice thing. By extension, the family members. I spoke with each of the family members as well and asked them if they were comfortable. And particularly, I focused on the mothers and grandmothers that I included in the book because they were the ones who I really delved into. But I got to know all of the family members of each of the young women. Also sat down with friends if they were going to be mentioned, and teachers, mentors, anyone who appears materially in the book, I gained consent from. If someone was mentioned just in passing, their name was changed. There were a few folks who I didn't get written consent from, but there was no sort of material story around them. They might have just been mentioned in passing, but anyone who was connected to the girls in a meaningful way gave me their approval to include them in the book. And the girls were actually wonderful about talking to their family members as well and making sure that they knew that they themselves were comfortable, because they ended up reading through all of the material that was germane to them, all of their sections, and coming back to me. I said, come back if you have any questions, any concerns, any changes. And I was so pleased that not one of them came back with any changes, other than Audrey said she was 13, not 14, when something or other happened. And I said, okay, we're good.
What about people, family members?
I'm good.
Here.
Sorry, the
I
sun
don't know
went,
how you can see.
the sun went right into my eyes. I apologize.
But Willow's father, I mean, did you have a relationship with him? I mean, is that okay?
Excellent question. So I actually consulted legal counsel on this one, and we made a determination not to contact her father. I asked her if she wanted me to, and she said she preferred that I didn't. And so as a result of that, I corroborated all of her stories with the only other people who were present at the time in the stories that she had about her father. And that, by and large, in almost every instance, was her mother. And so her mother corroborated, and I was able to be in touch with her mother, and I'm very, very grateful to her, because it took a lot of courage for her to do that. And I'm really pleased that we remain connected, and so that we're able to be in touch to this day.
My name's Lee Minkler, and I grew up in both worlds. I grew up on a family farm in upstate New York. Can anybody not hear me?
Please take the
I don't
microphone.
want to talk into this thing because I'm afraid of COVID. Okay.
I can hear you.
So I went to with a high school class of 51 kids. 7 of us went on to college, to my school back then. How many kids were in these classes typically, and what percentage went on to college?
So typically in these classes, you're looking at 30 kids in a class, sometimes fewer. I actually had lunch just the other day with the art teacher, Franny, in the book, Britt Francis, a beloved art teacher, a mentor to almost all of these young women and many, many more. Someone who came from away and made her life in this community. And the reason I mention her is because she told me that unfortunately coming out of this COVID period, as has happened in too many high school communities, not just rural but urban as well, they've lost students. Students have dropped out, and they're very concerned about that. But that's an additional challenge and overlay that unfortunately is going on, not just in these places. College going is low. Interestingly, high school graduation rates in Downeast, Washington County are extremely high. We are talking 95+%. It's really high, which is really good. When it comes to college, though, it drops off precipitously. One of the biggest there were all the reasons that we think of, right? But one of the extra reasons here, of course, is that the lobster fishing industry is so strong that if a boy, and increasingly if a girl, is lobster fishing, they will, as McKenna struggled to determine, right, for herself, they will make the decision not to go on to college, and that depresses the numbers even more. But it's an excellent question, and I know you lived it, and it's something that community. In fact, Dennis and I were talking about this because I think he had a very different experience. I don't want to tell his story, but in rural Ohio, correct, where college going was very high, and that tends to be an anomaly in rural places.
We have one more question. And then,
I'm curious about your take on what about the boys. When I started my teaching career in early childhood, kindergarten, first grade reading, in 1972, and at that time we were given a lot of opportunities to learn about how to teach boys and how to teach girls. And now I'm retired, and I live on MDI, and I see what the girls at the MDI high school do, and I don't see what the boys do. And so I'm worried about that, and I wonder if you have any ideas about that.
Yes, so this is a question that has come up in every talk that I've given. And it is the question I think that is on a lot of people's minds more broadly, as it is with you, Mary. I don't have, so everyone I spoke with, I asked them this question because I wanted to see if I could understand it from the ground up, rather than kind of going off and reading papers about what experts thought about this and see whether the views or the thoughts about it diverged or converged. And I didn't get a great answer, but here's what I could tell you. Here are the pieces that I understand, to the extent I understand it. One is that these communities do have very strong women. They have a legacy of strong women, and it's not to say that they don't have a legacy of strong men, but the strong men are out fishing, and the strong men are, running work sites, and they may be overseeing the blueberry farming, right? And so they are not as present. And so the extent to which there are male role models in these places where hard work starts at a very, very early age, to the extent that there are male role models, there are only very few. And I had this conversation with another person featured prominently in the book, who goes by Manny Parsons in the book, who who ran the EDGE program at the Seacoast Mission. It's a program, wonderful program for young people in Washington County and in that area of Washington County in particular. And he and I talked a lot about this because he had been a football coach at Harvard before he came and devoted his life to these kids with his wife, who runs the food pantry there to this day. And he really focused in on this role model piece. And he wanted to and tried very hard to play that role for these kids, for these boys. And some of them he got through to, and some of them he didn't. So there's one, right? Role models. Two is, I don't think this is, I think this happens in other places as well, and you can fill in the blank for the industry, but lobster fishing for boys, right? It takes them, they go at 17 or 18, and so the motivation for doing well in school, for excelling in other areas, is very low, and so they have to be shown the way, and that comes back to that mentorship or role model. And so I think that's a second piece, and then a third piece that I'll leave you with, because I don't know if it's the answer or not, and some may perceive it as somewhat controversial, but I was really struck in one of my many conversations with the high school principal, a woman who is a multi-generational family. Her family goes way back to revolutionary times in that region, and she's seen it all in her time as principal. She has since retired and actually moved on to run a vocational center in the area. She said to me in one of our conversations about this, when I write about this in the book, and I'll end with this, I fear that I'm paraphrasing, that in lifting up our girls as we have, and we've made a really strong effort to do that, and it was the right thing to do, she said. It's really important to do that. She said, I fear, though, that we have sent a signal back to our boys that they are somehow lesser than, that we've pushed them down, and that we've neglected that piece of the education in our focus on this, and we could have done better with that. And so I know there's a lot being written on this now. I know that it is complicated and sometimes controversial, but I do think it's, as you say, something worth paying attention to. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here tonight.
Gigi, for talking to us tonight. You've given us such a thoughtful analysis of the difficulties and obstacles that young women in rural America face, but also you've just given us this hopeful sense of their strength and resilience going forward. Thank you for sharing their stories with us tonight. I'm Catherine Nelson. I'm also a member of the Board of Trustees of the library. And I want to thank all of you for being here for this presentation tonight. I also want to thank St. John's Church for allowing us to use the lawn for our venue tonight. Many of you here, I know, are already patrons of our lovely local library. But some of you may not be patrons, and some of you may only use the library occasionally. I would urge you all to come into the library. Please stop by. Come to the circulation desk, introduce yourself to our staff. They would be very happy to help you select something to read, and also very happy to help you understand all the online services that the library offers. The library has many online services, including movies, audiobooks, ebooks, even TV shows, I think. And of course, we have our own digital archives. And the digital archives site is just spectacular. If you haven't poked around on it, you might want to spend some time. It's got great historic photos and maps of Southwest Harbor and MDI. And I think it is really fun and enjoyable, and you should take a look at it if you haven't already. If you are a donor to our library, we are extremely grateful. 100% of our donations, of your donations, go to support ongoing library operations. If you're not a donor currently, please consider the library when you make your charitable donations. We rely on donations to support all of our programs and services for the community throughout the year. So we really do rely on our donors, and we appreciate them tremendously. Now, tonight is just one of the many programs and events the library is sponsoring this summer. I'm just going to briefly give you a quick rundown of a few things that are coming up, but you might want to look at the library website for further details. This Thursday, musicians from Kneisel Hall are coming to perform, and I think they're going to be performing Brahms and Bartok, and they're going to be at the school gym at 7 o'clock. And that is, as many people who want to attend can come to that. Next Tuesday, August 26th, John Ross is going to be speaking to us. He's a nonfiction author. July 26th. Did I say June? It all blends together. July 26th. He's a nonfiction author, and he's going to be speaking to us about his most recent book, which is The Promise of the Grand Canyon. And it's about the exploration and discovery in the mid-1800s of the Grand Canyon. And it's a phenomenal story. He'll be a great speaker, and I hope you can plan to attend that. That one is going to be a hybrid event, in person in the library, a limited number of attendees, and also by Zoom. So you need to pre-register for that one. In August, we have many great speakers in August, but I'm just going to highlight two. Suzette McAvoy, who's the curator at the Farnsworth, is going to be speaking to us about the Farnsworth collection, and she will be speaking on August 9th. That's also an event that will be hybrid, the library and Zoom, and you need to pre-register for that one. On August 11th, we have Karen Miller Pensiero speaking. She is the managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, and we are really excited and looking forward to having her speak to us. She'll be talking here on the church lawn as well, and we're keeping our fingers crossed about weather. So thank you for attending tonight, and I hope I see you at many of the other events this summer. Thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention Gigi has some books up here for sale, and she's going to sign some books as well. So please come.